Hello again. So what do you get when you mix cutthroat deception, a dark and dangerous empire, houses run by maniacal tyrants, a seemingly insurmountable enemy who wants everyone dead, and a frankly concerning amount of incest? That's right.
It's Arrested Development.
So if you didn't watch my last video, let me bring you up to speed. British and American comedies differ because the endings in British ones are pessimistic and we like to laugh at our characters' pain a lot more. That's it. That's all I said. Jesus Christ, how did I ever make short videos? But ignoring my failings as a YouTubian, let's look at how two American comedies, two that translate so well for British audiences that I almost can't imagine them airing in the States, both fit the bill of a sadistic, miserable British comedy, particularly in the endings of their episodes. I find it notable that both became big in the UK at a time when they were, well, It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia literally had to add Danny DeVito as a sort of stunt casting in its second season because the low ratings had left them with no money for more traditional marketing. And Arrested Development gained a huge following in the US of K despite being cancelled after its shortened third season. The reason for this, their popularity in the UK, I mean, seemingly being how well they adopt the ideologies of British comedy television. See, both shows follow the things always get worse trait of your standard Channel 4 comedy, and they manage to do this through very different means. In Always Sunny, it's because there's no flaw for these people. They are the worst people in Philadelphia, and every episode only sees them stoop to new lows. They were young people who owned a bar in the city, capable of dating and making friends and embarking on adventures or genuine business ventures. They dreamed of moving up, and it seemed possible were it not for the flaws that held them back. But as they continued to screw things up, to beat each other down into the dirt, and to mess up every scheme that they could conceive of, this changed. They aged beyond the point where they could just be seen as young individuals living that Gen X lifestyle, and their insanity drove away the customers, the friends, and the love interests, to the point where the only people around them were the ones who had been dragged down to their level. The cash injection offered by Frank's introduction to the crew meant that their strange plans and cruel intentions were exacerbated, and facilitated a lifestyle that stopped them from moving on, instead only worsening their worst characteristics and ridding them of what little accountability they were already bound to. Every episode can have a negative impact upon them, because they can and do and continue to become worse, driving themselves further into the filth and squalor for all eternity. Arrested Development, funnily enough, has a more arrested development. Its characters are similarly unaccountable because, similarly, they are very wealthy. But instead of that prosperity being introduced to a gang of depraved and desperate individuals, it is the privilege that these characters are built upon. They can afford to fall down at the end of each episode, having their world made more miserable by the consequences of their actions, precisely because they had such heights to fall from. These are Americanizations of the British reality, which is that we can continually suffer these distresses because we were never optimistic enough that we would escape them in the first place. We are already miserable, so every pitfall is just water under the bridge, so to speak. That doesn't work in the optimistic land of the American dream, so instead their characters need a defining aspect that continues to drag them down. And for me, this is epitomized in each show by one particular character. The same character in many ways, and this character is seen in the tragic figures of Job Bluth and Mac McDonald. Let's do Job first. G.O.B. Bluth. The B in Job Bluth is a bit redundant, isn't it? Very Detective Comics there. Anyway, the fact that I feel that Job is so fitting of British comedy is predominantly down to how hopelessly tragic he is as a human being. He has his life served up to him on a silver platter where he's been raised rich and with an abundance of opportunities, and finds himself at the start of the series with the life of a wealthy womanizer, living on a yacht and being in a relationship with a kind and loving girlfriend who is also a famous television star. Doesn't sound all that pathetic, right? Well, there's a reason that a number of episodes end with Job himself saying,
"I've made a huge mistake."
He pretty quickly throws away his cash, his yacht, his relationship, his position in the Magician's Alliance, and seemingly his ability to make friends or speak to women.
Should the guy in the $32.
He seems, from more or less his first moments on the screen, to take nothing but L's, proving hopeless even in the one field that he adores, and showing himself to be so friendless that not only is he completely reliant upon his family alone for any type of kindness or attention, but he is also so unfamiliar with the concept of friendship that the one time he feels it, he believes it to be love, resulting in him having an affair with the man that he's friends with, despite the two of them both being straight. He even has a ringtone that is a pop song about how terrible he personally is, because he's so starved for approval that he thinks that a song with his name in it must be about how great he is, or at least he hopes it is, no matter how blatant the lyrics may be. He's completely unwanted by both of his parents.
I love all my children equally. I don't care for Joe.
Leading him to become needier and needier as the two people who should care about him the most both consistently deny him any kind of interest or parental love. In fact, he's so desperate for the attention and approval of someone, anyone, that he latches onto every single act of even the slightest kindness, which, unfortunately, he can only get from Michael, a sibling whom he feels he needs to be superior to given that Job is his older brother. As such, he's constantly yearning for respect from those who will never give it to him, and he pushes away anyone who actually does care about him, only resulting in him feeling more and more alone and, well, you can see how this is a self-perpetuating cycle. This also leads to him being manipulated, frighteningly easily, by others, most notably his father, who sees Job's desperation as the only quality that is of any use to him. He may begin the show at the peak of his powers, but the thing about a peak is that it's all downhill from there. Job's situation becomes more and more desperate, and as a result his actions become more and more depraved. He goes from the relatively harmless action of throwing dead doves and letters into the ocean to dating his nephew's ex-girlfriend Egg, waiting together until she turns 18, which the showrunners literally aged her up so that he could do that. He's bending the rules of time and space so that he can sleep with a teenager, and all because she made him some scrambled ants. And he even tries to fuck his own sister when he finds out that they're not biologically related.
Well, now it's my nausea.
Although she did try to do the same with another brother shortly beforehand, but that doesn't make it any less horrifying. A huge part of why we feel so able to laugh so freely at the agony of British comedy characters is how awful they are as human beings. They're in their own personal hell, and almost always of their own creation, and we can take a sort of schadenfreude from that. And Job? Well, as sorry as I feel for him, he's also a complete monster. Thinking about the things that make him the way that he is, it's like a true crime podcast when they tell you about the young life of a serial killer, and you're like, oh wow, they went through some seriously horrible shit, and I can see why this would mess someone up as a kid. But also, lots of kids go through that horrible shit, and 99% of them grow up to be not serial killers. And I think that's why Job stands out to me as additionally tragic, because stupid and arrogant as he is, he could easily also be a part of that 99%. He isn't George, who willingly manipulates others in spite of an understanding of his wrongdoing, nor is he Lindsay, who is so shallow and materialistic in spite of knowing better, or Michael, who is addicted to being needed and acting as morally superior, which gives him a sense of control. Job isn't Tobias, who repeatedly turns down the option to make hundreds of thousands of dollars a year as a therapist in order to chase a half-baked pipe dream of a thespian livelihood despite the pleas of the dependents in his family. Nor is he Lucille, who is, well, she's Satan. All of the characters in his family, bar Buster, who I don't even know how to approach him, are capable of escaping this hellish situation, but choose to stay behind because, as each and every one of them understands, they prefer that world. It benefits them. And although Job does briefly work for Stan Sitwell instead of the Bluth company, Job doesn't have that opportunity, because Job doesn't stay by choice. Were he to have it his way, he would work as a magician and live alone, and maybe, just maybe, someone might actually be proud of him for once. But what Job gets is admonished for his achievements and an insatiable, well, no, perfectly satiable, but forever unsated desire for someone to act as though they actually care about him.
And we didn't want to bring up those bad old memories. Besides, this place already has enough bad ones for me. My mother died here. Job was born here.
Job's cycle of British endings could very easily come to a halt if he'd only been supported as a child, or even just, like, ever. And every time I see him falling for one of his dad's tricks or lying about how much sex he's having, I can't help but both laugh at his misfortune and have some sympathy for someone who is clearly just desperate to be loved. But that's the pain of being British or something. I really lost the thread of what I was saying here, but I'm hoping that enough of you just zone out when you're watching my videos that nobody will actually notice. Mac. Mac is much the same as G.O.B, really. And if you know Always Sunny, then you probably recognise a lot of those similarities when I was describing the worst magician in California. Not just because he has a dad in prison, but more the fact that that dad would never in a million years tell him that he loved him. He deludes himself into believing that he's a lot cooler than he is because he can't hope to compete with the idea that he's built up of his father, and the fact that he's desperately falling short of the expectations that he had of himself. And furthermore, he too is just clinging on to any shred of approval thrown his way by the show's closest thing to a leading man, who is himself a complete sociopath who would never let himself admit that he needs Mac, meaning that he only pushes Mac further away as Mac expands all of his efforts vying for Dennis's support. And like G.O.B, Mac starts out in a decent position, this time as a young bar owner who spends his time trying to meet romantic interests and generally doing what 20-somethings do with his best friend. In the beginning, he proves himself capable of making friends, of coming up with schemes, of providing value to his friendship group, and of at least appearing to not be a complete scumbag for like 5 minutes. But as he continues, things only worsen. He loses all viability as a functioning member of society as his hatred of women and general anger at the world come to the fore, rendering him unable to have a normal conversation and leaving him turning to his weight and, oh yeah, the cult that he joins as his only sources of approval. If you're not sure what I mean by that, it's that by following the rules of the cult, adhering to the ideas of the other cult members and thus receiving praise, and intentionally gaining weight in both fat and muscle, he is seeing some kind of feedback that is actually in line with what he sought in the first place, which is not what he gets from Dennis, who, in the episode Waiting for Big Mo, explicitly outlines how he has intentionally been giving Mac the opposite of the praise that he desires, so as to elicit even more intensity in Mac's yearning for his approval, which is not healthy for old Ronald McDonald. Mac's neediness also drives away his friends, who are, or at least were, literally the only people in the world who felt that it was worth putting up with him. They now openly talk about how they hate him and how they wish he wasn't a part of their lives. And remember, these are the worst, most isolated people, probably in their entire fucking state. Frank has admitted to both rape and attempted murder on several occasions, as well as causing the deaths of children in his sweatshops in Vietnam before forcibly feeding said children to the other workers in said sweatshops. And these are just 3 moments from 3 specific episodes that come to mind right away. I'm sure there's a lot more out there. I mean, he literally gets his own children to dig up their dead mother under the pretense that she actually faked her death and buried a bunch of valuables in her own grave, because he just doesn't like them. Dennis is like almost definitely a serial killer who almost definitely has a collection of skin luggage and who almost definitely, wait no, he 100% does do this, convinces the entire group that they should murder a man. At one point, he has to be prevented from murdering the waitress, the love of his best friend's life, and as I mentioned earlier, he spends his entire time manipulating others because he believes that he is a god who, by order of his natural superiority, should be free from the burdens of others' ideas of morality. Dee openly admits to planning to murder both her father and her brother, and is noted for having raped Charlie as well as, seemingly, several others. Outside of the Reynolds family, Charlie, who is generally presented as the most innocent of the bunch, assaults a mall Santa in this grisly scene and plans to kill and eat a stranger with Dee, alongside generally getting involved with the gang's mayhem and showing a penchant for kidnapping and torture. And of course, Frank also waterboards his own daughter in a urinal. I almost forgot about that one. These are the people who can't stand Mac, not because he's not like them, he certainly is, but because even those people find him unbearable. He should be able to walk away from all of this. Besides his mother, he doesn't actually have any commitments, and she would be more than happy if he simply left and never came back, which, had he done towards the start of the series, he might have actually made something of himself. But the qualities fostered by Mac's friends and family are, as with G.O.B, the very thing tying him to the sinking ship. He's even more of a monster than Will Arnett's character, but he's also more desperate and, I would say, more sympathetic. He too is emblematic of the British comedy nature of the show's outlook, and once again it is because he is capable of not being there. Contrary to what I said earlier, I didn't just speak about British shows having pessimistic endings in part 1, but also about the fact that they build up hope, and then whisk it away just as you might have been led to believe that things were looking up, just as something positive was finally in their grasp. Well, I think that the reason that Mac and G.O.B remind me so much of that dynamic is that they do have prospects. In theory. They could get out of there if only they'd have some positive outside influence, or come to realise the absurdity of what it is that is keeping them there in the first place. They never get the love that they desire so much, something that seems to many to be the base level of a healthy life. But they also can't escape the environment that denies them love and approval because they are too scared of being left behind and forgotten. The people they are trying to please are therefore always the people who care about them the least, especially as their constant efforts to please them become grating for those frankly undeserving of this level of admiration, and because of this they only feel more isolated and only try harder to please them.
Mom, people would have twisted that story to make you look bad.
I don't see what the big deal is. We loved her just as much as any of you normal kids. More than G.O.B.
Oh my, well, accidents happen.
From the very first episode, we learn that G.O.B has been rejected his entire life, even by the parents that he continues to cling to so vociferously. And again, they're not perfect. G.O.B is a pervert who grooms a teenager, and Mac quite possibly murders a child at one point.
Hey, you!
Yet I can't help but feel sorry for the two people who could find a way out of their hellish cycles in which the characters of each show are trapped, were it not for the way that their personality has been warped to adapt to said cycles. Each show has the figure in decline who abandons the group because they believe themselves to be above the others, only to find themselves returning so that they can once again assume leadership of the only handful of humans more depraved than they are.
And talking to something that's never going to talk back to you.
Or will it?
Hey, take it easy, man. I'm not a doll.
Each show has the aging monster from another time who quietly exercises control over the others because doing so distracts them from the fact that they are no longer suited to this world and have fallen into their children's social lives as a means of feeling young or loved. Each show has the recognised weird one who never had a chance and has built up an endless array of bizarre rituals and behaviours after a lifetime of being held too closely by, frankly, unhinged matriarchs. And each show has the woman who was brutally bullied and neglected by a heartless mother and thus turned to their wealthy father for materialistic satisfaction, a technique that has rendered them unable to function in social situations or connect with others on a meaningful level. But each show also has someone who, despite their flaws, could have thrived elsewhere and just never realised that about themselves. Each has settled into a life that doesn't fulfill their expectations, and therefore they veer between lashing out and yearning for a pat on the back. Much like Mac, who, again, will go from following Dennis's commands like a loyal lapdog to threatening violence against his friend in mere moments.
People say it's better than an orgasm.
Not that he's ever had one.
I've had orgasms! I've had tons of orgasms! I've had one with your mom, dude! I will strangle you! I'll stick my goddamn thumb through your eye! Whoa, dude, relax.
These two are possibly my favourite long-running comedic characters from the other side of the Atlantic, and despite everything I said about them being so fitting for a British audience, I would hope that there's a universal appeal to the complexities of making a comedy character like this. Sure, you could argue that the audience has to be comprised of complete pieces of shit if they're going to spend their lives laughing at the misery of characters who they also feel sympathy for, but I don't know. Maybe we are. Thank you for listening to my complete and utter madness in the last couple of videos. I really appreciate you taking the time to watch, and I hope that you enjoyed what you saw. I know that Mac and Joe aren't the only characters like this, not by any means, but they are, I would say, the most refined that I can remember seeing, at least in a comedic setting. That said, if you have any other examples of characters like this, or ideas to contribute regarding the characters themselves, please do let me know, as I make sure to read every comment and I'd love to hear what you thought about the video. And if that's everything, well, I hope to see you next time.